Good evening, everyone. We now arrive in the book of Jeremiah, chapter 27. We see once again, for the second time, this expression, Bereshit, in the beginning of the kingdom or the reign of Jehoiakim, the son of Josiah. It is a reference to a very important event because all these ideas of the beginning of the reign is the way where ancient people will calibrate their calendar. These are major events when a king starts to reign. And as each king starts to reign, the people will always make a mark of that time. And so in this prophecy, uh, God speaks to Jeremiah, and it tells us this particular time frame where Jehoiakim, the son of Josiah, took on the throne. Now remember, Jehoiakim was installed by Pharaoh Necho. So I just want to make a note here. Installed by Necho. Remember, it was Pharaoh Necho uh, in the engagement between Josiah and Pharaoh Necho that Josiah was killed by an arrow. And Pharaoh Necho put Jehoiakim, the son of Josiah, as the king of Judah. Now, when it is installed by Pharaoh Necho, it means that Judah now becomes a vassal state to Egypt. And Egypt is a very powerful kingdom at that point in time, but so is the Assyrians and then the Babylonians. This word came to Jeremiah from God, and it is at the beginning of Jehoiakim. So we need to remember when we have Jehoiakim, then after 11 years, then we have Jehoiakim. And after 3 months, then we have Zedekiah for 11 years. And then it was the end. So what we are now told is that it is here at the beginning of Jehoiakim. And it says, thus says the Lord to me. And this would be Jeremiah. Now, oftentimes in the Hebrew expression, we get God teaching using what we call visual illustrations. We saw once earlier on when God told Jeremiah, run down and look at the potter's house and see what the potter is doing with the clay. And so here, God does another of these, what we call a visual illustration. He says, make for yourselves bonds and yoke and put them on your neck and send them to the king of Edom, the king of Moab, the king of Ammon, the king of Tyre, and the king of Sidon by the hand of the messengers who come to Jerusalem until Zedekiah, the king of Judah. So we need to explain this a little bit. First, God asked Jeremiah to make for yourselves. By yourselves, it would be Jeremiah and the messengers right here. And these are the messengers who will go to the king of Edom, the king of Moab, the king of Ammon, the king of Tyre, and the fifth king of Sidon. These are the current active kingdoms that is around Judah. And God says that this will have to be also spoken to King Zedekiah, which will come later, after 11 years. And so this is a period where we now need to understand what exactly and how long did Jeremiah wear this. So oftentimes we are told that Jeremiah made the bonds and yokes as a visual illustration. The messengers would wear it when they went to see the king of Edom, king of Moab, king of Ammon, king of Tyre, and king of Sidon. And then we also find that Jeremiah would be speaking to Jehoiakim and Zedekiah 11 years down the road, which tells us this. In chapter 28, which we will see tomorrow, it would be not until the fourth year of Zedekiah. So there is a possibility that Jeremiah wore this illustration for 15 years, all the way to Zedekiah to the fourth year. And so we'll read this in chapter 28. So we leave it for tomorrow. For today, we now read this and command them to say to their masters, which will be the kings, thus says the Lord God of hosts, the God of Israel. It is interesting for us to note that these few kings know the God of Israel, Jehovah Sabaoth. Now, they may not follow Jehovah, but they know of Jehovah, the Elohim of Israel. And thus you shall say to your masters, this is what you say to these kings. I, Jehovah, have made the land, the man, and the beasts that are on the ground by my great power and by my outstretched arm. And again, this one we learn in Exodus. This is by the authority. Great power is the might. And then it says, I have given the authority to whom it seemed proper to me, which tells us this, that God is the one who actually assigns authority to the masters, to the kings. It says in verse 6, we are now told, and now at this time, I, Jehovah, have given all these lands, and by all these lands, please take note that it is the land of Edom, Moab, Ammon, Tyre, and Sidon. And then looking at this, it will also be Judah. And then we see into the hand of Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon. And very interestingly, we see this expression, my servant. Now, this is a very important expression because my servant is to designate the king of Babylon who will be used by God to execute judgment. It is not because Nebuchadnezzar is so righteous, right? That's not the case. And so do not think of the expression my servant to automatically think of something more moral and righteous. God looks at my servant purely from a functional viewpoint. The functional viewpoint being that the king of Babylon is to do what God has instructed him. That is to take sovereignty over all the land of Judah, including those that is around. And so notice, you don't find Egypt in this context, right? You find Edom, Moab, Sidon, Tyre, Ammon. And God is going to give a warning, what we call a early warning. It says, the beasts of the field I have also given him to serve him. So all nations shall serve him, his son and his son's son. So we have Nebuchadnezzar, we have Evil Merodach, and then we have Belshazzar, which we will read in chapter 5. The Bible talks about three of them, and we can read this in Daniel chapter 1 to chapter 5. It says, until the time of his land Nebuchadnezzar comes, and then many nations and great kings shall make him, Nebuchadnezzar and Babylon, serve them. And so that will be the time where the Medo-Persian Empire and successive empires will come after Babylon, which also means that all of this tells us that it is important for us to realize chapter 27 is to give us the prophecy of the progression of how the lands, including Judah, will be under Nebuchadnezzar. We are also told that they will serve him. So all these nations shall serve Nebuchadnezzar. Now, serve means to listen to what he says. And in this case, they will be servants of Babylon. They will be under the servitude of Babylon until a successive kingdom that will come around. And the warning now comes again. It shall be that the nation and kingdom which will not serve Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, as Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, is my servant, as God has said, and which will not put its neck under the yoke of the king of Babylon, that nation I will punish, says the Lord. So think of it this way. We now have a visual illustration. And the visual illustration is this, that he will have to make a yoke. And the yoke itself is a piece of wood that hangs around the neck. And this is symbolic of being under the command and authority of a foreign power. But here, God clearly states that if they do not listen, God will punish that nation. And so the message that Jeremiah and the messengers also having to wear this yoke to talk to the other five kings is to tell them to submit to the king of Babylon. And it continues with the sword, the famine, and the pestilence until I have consumed them by his hand. So all those that will resist Nebuchadnezzar will be destroyed. But more importantly would be these words. Therefore, do not listen to your prophets, false prophets, your diviners, your dreamers, your soothsayers, or your sorcerers. These are all what we call distractions. God did not allow the Israelites to solicit from other people who seem to be able to do magic or to be able to tell news and information that is beyond what God has said to the prophets, including false prophets. Why? God calls these people, the prophets, the diviners, the dreamers, the soothsayers, and the sorcerers. They are telling the people, you shall not serve the king of Babylon. And then we see here that God tells them that they must serve the king of Babylon. else God will destroy them. So now we have two messages, one from Jeremiah and two from false prophets. Now we will learn next chapter how we can tell one is a false prophet and one is a true prophet from the illustration. And God says, for they prophesy a lie to you. A lie means a deceit. To remove you far from your land. Why? Because if they refuse to submit to the king of Babylon, then they will be taken and dispersed far away. And God says, I will drive you out. Now, this word in chapter 27, verse 10 says, I will drive you out, literally means I will cause you to be banished. I think that would be a good word. So, cause you to be banished. Now, the idea here is that you will have to leave the land and go somewhere else. And then it says, and you will perish. You will die there. But the nations that bring their necks under the yoke of the king of Babylon and serve him, I will let them remain in their own land, and they shall till it and dwell in it. So what's going to happen is this. We are now told that these ones, the ones that will serve him, they will remain. And so the kingdoms of Sidon, Tyre, Ammon, Moab, and Edom, they were there, but Judah started to fight, and Zedekiah was repelling the Babylonian king. Eventually, in the 11th year, he too was taken away, and so they would not remain in the land. So we see in history that only the king of Judah and the princes and the people were taken into exile. In verse 12, I, Jeremiah, also spoke to Zedekiah, king of Judah, according to all these words. Remember, it was Jehoiakim all the way down to Zedekiah. And so here, Jeremiah also spoke to Zedekiah. So we have him talking to Jehoiakim and to Zedekiah, both the kings of Judah. And the speech was this: bring your necks under the yoke of the king of Babylon and serve him and his people and live. That's the warning that's given to all the kings. Remember, at the early point in time, right here, we have Edom, Moab, Ammon, Sidon, and Tyre. They were told the same message is given to Zedekiah: serve and you will remain in the land. Why will you die, you and your people, by the sword, by the famine, and by the pestilence, as the Lord has spoken against a nation that will not serve the king of Babylon? We find eventually Zedekiah fought the king of Babylon. So in the third siege, that was what happened. Therefore, the warning is against false prophets. Do not listen to the words of the prophets who speak to you, saying this. The false prophet says, you shall not serve the king of Babylon. And this is a lie. For I have not sent them, says the Lord, yet they prophesy a lie in my name. So there are many prophets in the history books that claims to be prophet, but actually is not saying what God said, and they are giving words of comfort and encouragement to fight the king of Babylon, which is totally opposite as to what Jeremiah is saying. And because of that, then God will drive you out and you will perish, you and the prophets who prophesy with you. Now, these are serious words. In the English, we don't find the seriousness of it, but in the Hebrew, it conjures out the expressions and the emotions that it is utterly important for the people in Judah to listen to Jeremiah and not to the other prophets, which means that there is always, at that point in time, a contention of prophets giving prophecies, and the dilemma would be who is right and who is wrong. Now, carrying on this, also I, Jeremiah, spoke to the priests, the Kohen, and all these people saying, thus says the Lord. This is what God says. And so we are given insight as to what Jeremiah has to speak to the Kohen and the people. And this comes from God. It says this, do not listen to the words of your prophets. They are false prophets who prophesy to you. They claim to hear God and see visions, but no. And this is the situation. The prophets who prophesy to you cannot know this. What is God trying to say? Look, the vessels of the temple, the Lord's house, will now shortly be brought back from Babylon. Now, understand this. The vessels were taken away in the first siege of the king of Babylon. And that would be the time when Zedekiah was reigning. So in three sieges, Jehoiakim and up to Zedekiah, there are three sieges. In the first Nebuchadnezzar siege, he took all the vessels of the temple. The prophets are saying, don't worry, they will all come back from Babylon. But God is saying you need to live under the reign of Babylon, which also implies that the vessels of the Lord's house will not come back. And so the false prophets are speaking falsely, wrongly, for they prophesy a lie, a shakar to you. Do not listen to them. Serve the king of Babylon and you will live. That's speaking to Zedekiah. Why should this city be laid waste? But if they are true prophets, and if the word of the Lord is with them, let them now make intercession to the Lord of hosts, that the vessels which are left in the house of the Lord, in the house of the king of Judah and at Jerusalem, do not go to Babylon. And so now we are given an insight. So, one, in the first siege, in the first siege, the vessels of the Lord's house were taken to Babylon. Now it appears that there are vessels which are left in the house of the Lord and in the house of the king of Judah at Jerusalem. And so God, through Jeremiah, is going to challenge them. If these are true prophets, if, then let them prove. Now, understand in Deuteronomy 13, the proof of true prophets is by the words they speak, and that these words they speak will come to pass. Because the ability to make the events come to pass is because of God. And so the challenge is in the first siege, the king of Babylon had taken some, but there will come another siege. And can the prophets pray to God that the vessels which are left do not be taken away by the king of Babylon. Now, if that happens, when the siege happens and the vessels are still in Jerusalem with the king of Judah, then that'll be fine. Then these prophets will be speaking truth. But we know, according to history, that that's not going to be the case. Verse 19. For thus says the Lord of hosts, and this is regarding the pillars concerning the sea, which is the wash basin, concerning the carts, concerning the remainder of the vessels that remain in this city. These are the vessels that is remaining. Remember, when you understand that all of these, when they were made in the book of First Kings, chapter 7, they are all made of gold. And that is why the king of Babylon loves these kinds of vessels. And so much of the vessels were taken. There are the remaining ones. And when Nebuchadnezzar comes, it will be at a time when all of these will be taken away. So we are told in the first siege, which Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, did not take, when he carried away the captive Jeconiah, the son of Jehoiakim, the king of Judah, from Jerusalem to Babylon, all the nobles of Judah and Jerusalem. Now, this would be the second siege. So understand this, we have Jehoiakim, and then we have Jehoiakim, who is Jeconiah, and then we have Zedekiah, and this is the proof. When Nebuchadnezzar came here, he took some. So what is going to happen when Nebuchadnezzar comes now in the time of Zedekiah? So Zedekiah has to take up the challenge. Tell these prophets, if you are true, ask God to show that when Nebuchadnezzar comes, that all these remainder of the vessels, the sea, which is the wash basin, the bronze basin, the carts, the pillars of the temple, which is also in gold, that Nebuchadnezzar did not take away, that he will not. And so, yes, thus says the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, concerning the vessels that remain in the house of the Lord, in the house of the king of Judah, and in Jerusalem. God says this: they shall be carried to Babylon, and they shall be there until the day I visit them. Now, this word I visit them in verse 22 is a word that we have been examining, really. And this word is pakat. And it would be for the good and for the evil. For the good, God will bring blessing, and for the evil, God will bring judgment. And so, in this case, when God says, I will visit them, who is them? That God will visit the people of Babylon. What is important for us to realize that after Babylon, then God says, I will bring them up and restore them to this place. So what have we seen is that God has given a challenge to Zedekiah. If these prophets are telling you the truth, then make this prophecy that all these vessels, the sea, the bronze wash basin, or the copper wash basin, the carts, the pillars, all that will remain. If they are taken away, all the prophets will be false. Now we have a slight challenge here, that We can only know that these prophets have prophesied falsely when what they prophesy do not happen, but the opposite happens. And the opposite is what Jeremiah has been prophesying. And so now we have a contrast. We have what the false prophets are saying. And then on this side, we have Jeremiah. So as prophets go, we have to wait until the event takes place. If this does not take place and the opposite takes place, then we know for a fact that Jeremiah is true and the prophets here will be false. But at this point in time, when it's been said, God is already edicting and decreeing that yes, all of these will go away. And when they go away, they will not come back until God says it's time. And then there will be another nation that will then place Babylon into subjection. And then God will bring all of these utensils and instruments back to Judah and to Jerusalem, to this place, basically. Now, the second thing I want to point out to you is that we have no longer any information regarding the Ark of the Covenant. So it is as if that at this point in time, God has no longer addressed the Ark of the Covenant. Something has happened between earlier on and this time. And when Babylon, the king of Babylon came, there was no Ark of the Covenant. So all they could do is to take away all the utensils, the vessels of the temple. And the second time that they come, which would be the third siege, everything will be taken away. And that would be what Jeremiah is prophesying. And the false prophets will be proven to be false. So when we continue tomorrow, it is important for us to realize that as it is being described in chapter 27, it is most likely that Jeremiah is wearing that wooden yoke just to depict God's words in a more visual way, that all these things will happen and all the nations around are told to serve the king of Babylon. Don't fight him. If you fight him, you will die. It is a simple instruction. And we can see that all the nations, the five nations around Judah, did not really fight Nebuchadnezzar. But on the contrary, then Judah fought the king of Babylon, and thereby all of them were taken into exile, including all the utensils and vessels and implements of the temple, thereby proving to the king Zedekiah that what Jeremiah said is true. However, the dilemma is this: by the time the word of Jeremiah is proven true, it would be too late for Zedekiah. And so, what is important is then for them to decide up front who is speaking the truth. And that becomes a challenge. And we will see this tomorrow when we continue with chapter 28. And so, with this, we come to the end of our session today.